Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into a really fascinating philosophical journey, tracking one author's evolution from a young athlete's naive mindset all the way to a frankly radical proposal for totally restructuring global sports. We're unpacking some seriously thought-provoking source materials that challenge the very foundation of how international athletic competitions work today. We're talking about a profound shift in perspective, moving away from those glittering, high-budget, multi-billion-dollar spectacles we're so used to seeing on our screens and moving toward a strict athlete-focused sanctuary. It's a super compelling critique of the modern games, and as you'll see, it offers a highly specific architectural and socioeconomic blueprint for actually fixing them.
To really grasp the gravity of this material, we have to start with this deeply personal quote from the text. Listen to this. "I tell myself I missed the games due to injury, but I don't know if I truly could have gone." Wow, that is a heavy moral reflection, isn't it? Right off the bat, we're forced to realize that participating in international sports isn't just a physical act of running or jumping. It carries deep ethical and personal stakes. This isn't just some abstract academic theory we're talking about here. It's born from the mind of someone who has actually wrestled with the real-world implications of stepping onto the global stage. It makes you realize that a missed opportunity to compete might not just be about torn ligaments or bad timing, but about carrying a massive moral burden.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to move through 4 distinct phases. First, we'll look at the illusion of neutrality. Second, we'll dive into bread and circuses to understand the systemic rot of the games. Third, we'll unpack the Greece proposal for structural reform. And finally, we'll wrap up with reclaiming the common good. Let's jump right in.
Part 1, the illusion of neutrality and the personal shift of an athlete. To understand where this radical proposal comes from, we really need to look back at the historical athletic mindset that the author is actively trying to dismantle.
The source reflects pretty heavily on the 1978 World Cup in Argentina. Now, at that time, the prevailing mindset, especially when you look at the Dutch national team's trip, was what you could call the just play mantra. It was this kind of adolescent, physical reductionist belief that sport just exists in a vacuum. You pack your bags, you go play the game, and you come home. Simple as that. It didn't matter what the political climate or human rights record of the host nation was. The athlete's job was simply to focus entirely on the physical contest, consuming the event passively, and completely separating the sport from the reality of the real world around it.
But the author argues that we need a massive shift in perspective here. You have to move away from that naive, just play attitude, all that physical reductionism and passive consumption. Instead, an informed perspective actually demands moral necessity, complicity awareness, and a real focus on institutional integrity. True ethical awareness means acknowledging that claiming you're neutral while playing in corrupt nations is actually an active endorsement of the status quo. Maintaining a neutral stance in the face of systemic corruption just isn't a viable option for a serious athlete anymore. Silence in this informed view is absolutely an active choice.
Which brings us to Part 2, bread and circuses, and the systemic rot of modern global games. Taking that personal realization, the source moves into a rather harsh diagnosis of how these global competitions are currently being weaponized. And here is where we hit a really crucial concept. There's this Dutch word used in the text, kijkersbedrog. It essentially translates to viewer deception. The argument here is that the current model of international games has devolved into classic Roman-style bread and circuses. The primary function of these massive multi-week events is literally just to kill time and distract the public from underlying institutional rot. In this framework, the athlete's labor isn't actually being celebrated for human excellence. Instead, their sweat and dedication are being harvested simply to keep the masses happy, distracted, and quiet.
So how does this viewer deception actually work in practice? Well, the source breaks it down into 3 main mechanics of spectacle. First up, you've got state-led sports washing by hypocritical leaders, where politicians use these incredibly grand opening ceremonies to mask their own systemic failures. They are essentially grandstanding over the backs of the athletes. Second, there's exploitation by institutional criminals. And yes, that's the direct, heavy-hitting term the source uses to describe those who leverage serious competitors for illicit gain or to launder their reputations. And third, we've got hyper-commercialized media that prioritizes insanely high-profit TV rights over the serious pursuit of the sport itself. These events have basically become hollow entertainment products driven entirely by outside interests.
Which naturally brings us to a really pivotal question. If neutrality is a total illusion and the current system is fundamentally broken by this giant spectacle, how do we actually rescue the integrity of the athlete? I mean, it's one thing to critique the machine, but what is the actual tangible solution?
Well, and that takes us to Part 3, the Greece Proposal, a blueprint for serious sport. Instead of just leaving us with a critique, the author lays out a concrete, architectural solution to fix these systemic failures once and for all. The Greece Proposal is built on 4 pretty radical pillars. Step 1 is establishing a permanent location in Greece for the Olympic Games. Think about it. This completely eliminates those predatory bidding cycles and the construction of wasteful billion-dollar infrastructure in corrupt nations. Step 2 is financial reform. The author literally calls for the even distribution of the loot. TV rights should be kept at a low but sufficient level, just enough to sustain the sport without all the hyper-commercialism. Step 3 is the end of grandstanding. That means absolutely no more expensive, hypocritical opening ceremonies, just sport. And Step 4 is inclusivity, specifically calling for all football, both professional and amateur, to be fully integrated into this permanent Olympic structure, creating one clean, centralized system.
The entire philosophy behind this massive reform really boils down to this one powerful idea. No more bread and circuses, just serious sport by serious athletes for serious athletes. The goal is to completely strip away all those theatrical displays that hypocrites use for their own political gain. It's about creating a functional, predictable, and totally stable environment that actually serves the competitor, not the politician.
And finally, Part 4, reclaiming the common good and the socio-economic foundation. Now, this whole architectural fantasy, it's impossible in a vacuum, because this radical shift in how we host global sports requires an equally radical shift in our underlying economic policies.
To actually protect the serious athlete, the author argues that society has to protect the Gemeinschaft. That's a Dutch term for the communal or the common interest. Because sport is fundamentally a common human right, the argument is that we absolutely must reject the privatization of common interests. We need to implement a robust social safety net and actually fund sport through progressive taxation. Because when the public sphere is privatized and the social safety net is shredded, athletes just become vulnerable pawns in a market totally controlled by the elite. So, progressive taxation and social security, they are the essential groundwork needed to make the Greece Proposal a reality.
If we pull back and look at the big picture, what we're talking about is a total paradigm shift. This proposal completely flips the purpose of the games from viewer deception and killing time right over to serious competition. It takes the benefits away from politicians and high-profit media and gives them directly back to the athletes and the common interest. The venue moves from these rotating, often corrupt host governments to a permanent, stable home in Greece. And finally, the economics transition away from privatization and hyperinflated rights towards progressive taxation and even distribution. It is literally a complete structural overhaul from top to bottom.
Which leads us with this final, incredibly provocative thought straight from the source material. Will global sports remain a spectacle for criminals, or can we actually build a true sanctuary for athletes? The author makes it clear, maintaining the status quo is an active choice for deception, while the path forward requires some serious, radical, structural, and economic courage. It really makes you rethink what you're actually watching the next time you turn on a massive global sporting event, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I'll leave you to chew on that final question.